Tonight, budget battle. The government's plan to cut $1 billion from the Defense Department. The military's new financial fight.
There's very little left to cut. This will have a real effect.
And the impact on Canada's reputation with allies.
It makes them question everything that Canada's been saying.
A shocking arrest in the murder of Tupac.
For 27 years, the family of Tupac Shakur has been waiting for justice.
The breakthrough in one of the music industry's most enduring mysteries. Plus, a lesson in determination spanning 2 continents.
Really happy that we are starting school.
The class act that helps 6 Ukrainian hockey players reach a shared goal.
1, 2, 3, pass!
CTV National News with Omar Sachedina. Reporting tonight, Heather Butts.
Good evening. The country's top soldier says he's having difficult conversations with his generals, not about terrorism or security threats, but about saving money. The federal government wants to find spending reductions of nearly $1 billion over the next 4 years in the Defense Department. CTV's Kevin Gallagher on the potential impact at a moment of global unrest.
As Ukrainian tank squadrons worry about their dwindling supply of NATO-donated ammo, Canada recently committed long-term funding to Kyiv, even though cuts are coming for our own troops.
There's no way that you can take almost $1 billion out of the defense budget and not have an impact. So this is something that we're wrestling with now.
The Canadian Chief of Defense Staff made it clear to the Defense Committee he has orders to find savings.
You know, our people see the degrading, declining security situation around the world. And so trying to explain this to them is very difficult.
General Eyre is not sure how this will affect Canada's troops and the military's need to replace aging equipment.
These Liberals waste money on just about everything except our military. Why does the Prime Minister only cut spending when it hurts our troops?
The Defense Minister promises this budget reduction will happen over 4 years and won't affect the armed forces' capabilities.
We must ensure that all expenditures are carefully controlled so that each dollar produces real value for Canadians.
This is part of a broader call for federal government departments to reduce spending by more than $15 billion after years of high deficits. In July, Justin Trudeau stood with NATO allies as they all made a commitment to spend at least 2% of GDP on defense. Canada would have to increase spending by tens of billions to reach that target. So there are concerns this effort to find savings hurts Ottawa's credibility.
Internationally, it makes them question everything that Canada's been saying once again.
In a statement, Bill Blair says his government has increased defense spending each year since 2015. Still, it's not clear if Canada will ever meet the NATO spending target. Heather?
Thanks, Kevin. Celebration turned to tragedy in Pakistan when suicide bombings ripped through 2 mosques during events marking the birthday of the Prophet Muhammad. The first blast in the country's southwest killed at least 52 people and wounded nearly 70 others. Hours later, a separate blast during Friday prayers at a mosque in the northwest killed 5 people and buried dozens beneath rubble. No group has claimed responsibility. Investigators in Las Vegas have arrested a suspect they say is responsible for the murder of hip-hop legend Tupac Shakur. He was shot to death nearly 3 decades ago in one of music's most enduring mysteries. Here's CTV's Heather Wright.
27 years. 27 years.
For more than a generation, questions and conspiracies have swirled around the tragic death of one of hip-hop's biggest stars. Today, a possible breakthrough.
We are here today to announce the arrest of 60-year-old Dwayne Keith Davis, a.k.a. Keefy D, for the murder of Tupac Shakur.
Police say they have long known about Davis, who has repeatedly and publicly proclaimed he was in the car during the drive-by shooting that killed Shakur in September 1996. He even wrote a book about it.
To keep it for the code of the streets. It just came from the backseat for him.
It was those public statements that reinvigorated this case, leading to a search warrant that was executed earlier this year.
He provides his own series of statements that are very consistent with the evidence that we have on the scene.
One of the most popular artists of the 1990s, Tupac Shakur was just 25 years old when he was killed. Today, police laid out a timeline of events, which began when he got in a fight following a Mike Tyson boxing match.
Members of Death Row Records spotted Orlando Anderson near an elevator bay, and at that time they began to kick and punch him.
Orlando Anderson was Dwayne Davis's nephew. Police say from there, Davis ordered Shakur's death as retribution, obtaining a gun and riding in the white Cadillac that pulled up next to Shakur's BMW.
Mr. Davis took the gun that he had obtained and provided it to the passengers in the rear seat of the vehicle.
Police can't say who pulled the trigger. Davis has said it was his nephew, but he's the only person in the car who is still alive.
If you help somebody commit a crime, you can be equally as guilty.
The unsolved murder of Shakur and death of his friend turned rival, the notorious B.I.G. 6 months later, have long fueled conspiracy theories. A violent end to such a talented young life.
He was just amazing, and where he was going to go was just business-wise and musically.
Police say they have had much of this information for decades, but believe they now have the evidence needed to take this case to trial. Heather.
All right, Heather, thanks. Millions of people in New York and New Jersey are under states of emergency tonight. Historic rains brought life-threatening flash flooding, turning streets into lakes. Officials urged people to stay home and prepare for the worst. CTV's Washington Bureau Chief Joy Melvin reports.
The rain came fast and furious, triggering flash flooding. New York streets swamped with a month of rain in just a few hours, drenching the city and prompting officials here to declare a state of emergency.
And I want to say to all New Yorkers, this is time for heightened alertness and extreme caution. If you are home, stay home. If you are at work or school, shelter in place for now.
For those out already, getting anywhere became a challenge. Shutting down stretches of highways, FDR Drive littered with abandoned cars, and first responders were out rescuing dozens of people trapped by the floodwaters. Wow. In Brooklyn, the rain turned into raging rivers, floodwaters filling this city bus.
Oh my goodness.
Mass transit just a mess, and the subways looked more like canals. Water gushing downstairs, even the subway walls. Travelers left scrambling for a way home.
Now I come, the train is delayed, they don't know when. It's disgusting.
At LaGuardia Airport, all that water temporarily halted or delayed flights, forcing the closure of one of the 3 terminals.
It's pretty bad. It's just flooding in the water, and they canceled all the flights because they can't run the ground. So
it was all bad, honestly. Like, you had water coming in all through the bathrooms, all through the entrance there.
The rain so intense it broke records. Officials say this is now the wettest September in New York City in 100 years.
This changing weather pattern is the result of climate change. And the sad reality is our climate is changing faster than our infrastructure can respond.
A rare weather event that's becoming all too common. Joy Melvin, CTV News, Washington.
Air Canada pilots shared their frustration at the country's biggest airport today. More than 600 aviators held demonstrations outside Pearson International, drawing attention to the end of a decade-long contract as they try and land a new deal. CTV's Adrian Gobriel reports.
With placards in hand, picketing pilots lined Pearson International Airport.
Today signifies the expiry of our almost decade-old collective agreement.
And the beginning of what could be tense labor negotiations between the union representing more than 5,000 Air Canada aviators and the country's largest airline.
We're asking them to value our pilot group and invest in our pilot group.
The last collective deal reached in 2014 resulted in a 2% wage increase each year. The same union representing Air Canada's pilots, known as ALPA, just today struck a new deal for members south of the border, landing United Airline pilots a 40% wage increase over the next 4 years.
Pilots in the United States are paid sometimes 50, 100, upwards of 200% more in some cases than the Air Canada pilots right now.
The union claims Canadian pilots are flying south to greener pastures, creating a shortage of skilled aviators across the country. Air Canada's former COO disagrees.
Pilot shortages are impacting primarily
the regional carriers.
In May, WestJet pilots struck a deal of their own for a 24% wage increase, though negotiations went down to the wire and more than 100 flights had to be canceled. Some analysts believe the upward pressure on salaries could lead to even higher ticket prices.
There's only one pocket from which those cost increases will come from, and that's the pockets of consumers.
Both the union and the airline called today's public display an information picket, with Air Canada saying it remains engaged in productive discussions.
It's important to note that currently a strike isn't imminent. The last time pilots walked off the tarmac was during a 13-day labor dispute back in 1998. That cost Air Canada more than $130 million. Heather?
Adrian Gabriel at Pearson tonight. On the eve of Canada's National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, the Newfoundland and Labrador government made a solemn apology.
With a heavy heart, I respectfully and humbly offer an apology to the students in Nunavut who attended residential schools in Newfoundland and Labrador.
The pain of survivors is now being taught in classrooms across the country. CTV's Vanessa Lee now with the legacy and the learning.
A sea of orange fills the streets of Montreal as students reflect on truth and reconciliation and the children who never made it home.
It's devastating. It's really, really upsetting.
It's hard to imagine that something like that could happen.
We can't get over something that hasn't been talked about.
Indigenous leaders like Don Barnaby are sharing how they've been affected by Canada's ugly past, which they remind everyone was not so long ago. The last residential school did not close its doors until 1996.
Schoolyards do not have graveyards.
At this Montreal elementary school, teachers are doing their best to incorporate Indigenous histories, cultures, and viewpoints in their classrooms.
It's not new. We've been doing it for many years, and we teach it through storytelling, and we go over different topics.
Quebec says its curriculum has been updated in response to recommendations by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to include more of the Indigenous perspective. But advocates say it's not enough.
No, it's being shunned. It's still being shunned. Quebec is still a huge part of the systematic racism and the truth of it as well. They still don't teach what the actual residential school in Quebec situation was.
It's clear valuable lessons are being learned outside of the classroom. The next generation, part of the path to reconciliation.
When I see all these children out here, it gives me hope that there's going to be a brighter future.
High school students in BC are now required to complete an Indigenous-focused course before graduation, which the province says is a first in Canada. Vanessa Lee, CTV News, Montreal.
Coming up, the deepening division over Saskatchewan's pronoun policy.
We're going to ensure that that piece of legislation is passed at the earliest opportunity.
The province defends its plans to override a judge's ruling. Plus, a crash course in how to get caught by police. Saskatchewan's premier defended his decision today to recall the legislature and invoke the rarely used notwithstanding clause, allowing him to override parts of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. At the center of the issue, students and their pronouns. CTV's Allison Bamford reports from Regina.
A court injunction is not stopping Saskatchewan's government from expediting its plans to force a pronoun policy into law.
Those implementation plans will be in effect sooner rather than later.
Premier Scott Moe plans to use the notwithstanding clause to override the injunction, making parental consent mandatory for anyone under 16 to change their name or pronouns at school. A rare move for provincial governments. Outside of Quebec, the provinces have only used the clause a handful of times since 1982.
It's, I think, pretty noteworthy that the two of those half dozen times have been Saskatchewan on schooling issues around kind of morality and religion.
Political experts say Saskatchewan could move quickly on this legislation, in theory passing the bill in a week once the legislature reconvenes after Thanksgiving, putting into question upcoming court arguments in the constitutional challenge initiated by UR Pride.
The case continues. We still have our hearing scheduled in November. The litigation over the constitutionality of this policy will carry on until such time as it ends, and it isn't over yet.
There is broad interest on both sides in the outcome. The Canadian Civil Liberties Association is fighting its own legal battle against a similar policy in New Brunswick, the group calling the use of the clause an admission the Saskatchewan government knows its actions are unconstitutional.
If a judge in New Brunswick is asked to consider the same issue, he or she almost certainly is going to look at what was decided.
If Saskatchewan follows through on its use of the notwithstanding clause, experts say a judge could decide not to hear UR Pride's case. But until the clause is invoked, the court injunction stands, and school divisions will have to pause on implementing the pronoun policy. Allison Bamford, CTV News, Regina.
Police in New Jersey were fortunate to escape unharmed after a crash that hit a little too close to home. Surveillance video released today shows an SUV slamming into a police station last week. Prosecutors allege the driver deliberately drove into the building after crashing into a home earlier. The 34-year-old suspect was arrested. He's facing a number of charges, including terrorism and mischief. There's no word on a motive. The oldest sitting U.S. senator and a fixture of California politics, Dianne Feinstein, has died. The trailblazing Democrat held an historic 30-year career in the Senate with a reputation for reaching across the aisle. She was the first woman to be elected mayor of San Francisco. A champion for gun control, she helped author the 1994 assault weapons ban. A passionate advocate for the environment and reproductive rights, Dianne Feinstein was 90. Still ahead, the historic homecoming. A BC First Nation celebrates the return of a sacred totem pole. A sacred memorial totem pole said to be stolen nearly 100 years ago has finally returned home. Removed without consent in 1929 and sold to a Scottish museum, its return marks a long overdue step towards reconciliation for the Nisga'a people. CTV's BC Bureau Chief Melanie Nagy on the spiritual homecoming.
Every cut and every curve carved into the red cedar tells a story belonging to the Nisga'a people, one taken from them nearly a century ago. But today, on their traditional lands in northern BC, their historic narrative and the totem it's chiseled upon was reclaimed. In a publicly broadcast ceremony, the 11-meter pole was welcomed home after spending decades on display in the National Museum of Scotland.
It was transported down to Bryce Norton in England.
Teresa Schober is part of the team that facilitated the totem's return, following a formal request last year from the Nisga'a to the Scottish government. The pole's long journey took months to organize, but in recent weeks it was loaded into the belly of a Canadian military aircraft and carried across the Atlantic.
It was clad with plywood and then weather protected and then maneuvered through a number of stops.
The Nisga'a say the totem, which was carved in 1855, was taken without consent. A hurtful act, particularly because it's considered a memorial pole detailing the loss of a warrior.
The ancestral connection. This is a family member coming home.
Indigenous leaders say returning wrongfully taken cultural property is essential to reconciliation, like the Nisga'a. The New Hulk Nation recently recovered a totem after it was removed from its territory in the early 1900s.
Very, very strong message to the museums around the world that they should be returning back all our items.
As for the Nisga'a totem, it will now be housed in the nation's very own museum, where the hope is its story will inform and inspire. Melanie Nagy, CTV News, Vancouver.
Hockey superstar Sidney Crosby may be starting his 19th season in the NHL, but he still knows how to connect with his young fans. That was evident last night when the Pittsburgh Penguins captain waved to a young boy and tossed him the game puck. The reaction, one even Crosby wouldn't have imagined. And this is what it looked like from the stands. Such emotion on his face. A moment they won't forget. And we're sticking with hockey memories after the break. Some young Ukrainian players are back on the ice in Quebec. We leave you tonight with the story of 6 Ukrainian teenagers who've made their long-awaited start to the school year in Quebec City. They're fulfilling dreams of studying and lacing up in Canada. Quebec Bureau Chief Geneviève Boschman explains.
A month into the semester at St. Patrick's, 6 new students from Ukraine posed for back-to-school photos, eager to finally attend classes in Canada.
We needed first to start studying normally, to play hockey, to start our life same as guys from our team.
It's the game of hockey that took them from the front lines of war to Quebec City. The boys were on the roster for the Ukrainian team that landed in the province last February, dreaming of hockey glory.
I promised my family, I promised my country that we're gonna win.
Many of their fathers were fighting for Ukraine. One of their dads was killed. The preteen elite players were welcomed like NHL superstars and took center ice at the storied International Pee Wee Tournament, following in the footsteps of generations of hockey greats, Guy Lafleur, Wayne Gretzky. They returned home to war-torn cities after the competition, without the trophy, but with dreams of returning to Quebec to study and play school hockey. Now, with the help of a businessman and several billet families, 6 of them did return to Quebec a month ago. Paperwork prevented them from starting classes, including a wait for Quebec's authorization to attend English school. They kept busy, though, including making a trip to Ottawa, landing seats in the House of Commons for the visit of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Maxim Stepa presented him with a custom jersey.
Before yesterday, Zelensky was in my dream, and it was really cool, and I'm still proud of it.
Their paperwork now sorted, they joined schoolmates and new teammates today. Their coach has a game plan.
They're playing a really European style of play, so it's based on skills, stick handling. They're really good shooters too.
1-2, team! 1-2, same class!
And so until they can be safe in their home country, they've traded their Ukrainian hockey sweaters for school colors. Geneviève Boschman, CTV News, Montreal.
Such determination. That's our newscast for tonight. I'm Heather Butts. For Omar and all of us at CTV National News, thank you for watching. Sandy will be here tomorrow. Good night and have a great weekend.
I was afraid I was going to die in jail.
Trapped in a foreign country.
I'm not a drug dealer.
As a daughter fights.
They got something to hide.
For her mother's freedom. Watch W5 at a new day and time next Friday at 10 on CTV.